It's been 140 years since the events of Second Foundation, almost the halfway point between the old empire and the predicted new one. The latest Selden crisis revolved around the debate of whether to keep the capital on Terminus or to move it closer to the galactic center, given that the Foundation Federation, as it was called, covered a significant portion of the galaxy and was recognized throughout as the most powerful. Selden showed up, as he always did, and confirmed that keeping it on Terminus was the right decision, and everyone took that as a pat on the back for the mayor, Brano. She stands up in front of the council and says, "I think the best thing to do is admit, I was right, I'm awesome, and we all agree never to question this decision again." Shockingly, someone doesn't want to go along with that and stands up and makes a statement to that effect. His name's Trevise, and the mayor responds by declaring that she has learned that he's a traitor and has him taken away. Nothing suspicious about that timing, not at all. Trevise's reason is explained in private. He believes it's not possible for Selden to have been so correct, not after the mule stepped in and effed up the galaxy. The only explanation is that someone is working to keep the plan on track, and that means the Second Foundation must still be around. Brano tells him in a private meeting, "Really, thanks for the obvious, Councilman No Shit, but do you think that blabbing about it in public is going to do any good?" So she tells him that he is to be exiled, put onto a ship and sent out to go on some academic project. But his real purpose will be to search for the Second Foundation. He's given a state-of-the-art ship and will be joined by Pellerat, a scholar obsessed with finding the lost original planet of humanity, Earth. This gets Trevise thinking. Maybe the other end of the galaxy, where the Second Foundation was supposed to be, wasn't from a spatial standpoint. Maybe it was from a temporal standpoint. And so if Terminus is the newest planet, so the other end would be the oldest, Earth. Pellerat has a lead on it, a place called Gaia, which is another name for Earth, so Trevise says, forget the library on Trantor, why don't we go check out Gaia and see if that pans out. Meanwhile, we get our first real look into the Second Foundation. Their leader, the first speaker, is quite pleased with how the plan is working out thanks to them. But one of the other speakers, the youngest, named Gendabal, says the same thing that Trevise did. The plan's going too well. It's mathematically impossible for the plan to be this perfect without more direct intervention than what the Second Foundation is doing. And if they're not doing it, somebody else has to be. Somebody maybe even more powerful than they are. And whether they're more powerful or not, whether malicious or not, another body aware of the plan's existence and details would not be predicted by psychohistory, and so could wind up eventually leading the plan off course, even if at the moment they were helping it. Either way, this is a big deal naturally, but two things get in the way of that. One being a local farmer stopping Gendabal when he's out jogging so he can kick the shit out of him for no reason. Gendabal can stop him, of course, because all the Second Foundationers have mental abilities, but there are rules in place both on using their mental powers and doing anything to the locals. So he's stuck until a local woman named Novi steps in and shames them all into leaving him alone. Eventually, he helps get started with her dream of becoming a scholar, as they're called by the locals, but this is really just a chance to read and learn, not to become a true Second Foundationer. The other thing that gets in the way is another speaker, Delarmy, who has been maneuvering to become the next first speaker, a position that Gendabal likewise covets. She's his adversary in the discussions and even has him impeached, and he didn't get blown by an intern or anything. But he makes his case quite clear that these anti-mules, as the first speaker calls them, likely exist. There's an inexplicable striking of Earth from all records in the library, and Novi's mind shows evidence of having been tampered with in a way beyond their abilities. Also, like Trevise, Gendabal will have to take a road trip to go looking for this threat, and takes along Novi since her mind will demonstrate any influences of another mentalist so that Gendabal can do something about it. Also on the move is Compor, a fellow councilman who betrayed Trevise to the mayor, and who was then sent to follow him in exile to see where he goes by the mayor. Plus, Compor is actually an agent of the Second Foundation, the one who mentioned Earth to Gendabal based on what Trevise had been doing. He had run into Trevise on the planet Seychelles, a world independent of the Federation but surrounded by its territory. And while there, he and Pellerat learn that there's a lot of superstitious feelings about Gaia. But eventually they get a lead on where to go looking for it. Except the reason that's tricky is because bad things happen when people try to do that. They tend to not come back, and even the mule didn't want to go near the place, making a treaty with Seychelles instead of conquering it like the rest. But Treves is bound and determined to head there anyway. Meanwhile, the mayor and her head of security are following with a group of warships. She suspected that Compor was Second Foundation, and that Treves would act like a lightning rod and draw them out. She plans to see what all the fuss is about with this Gaia thing, and then head over to Trantor and blow away the Second Foundation. And after that, screw that 5 more centuries bullshit. We have the means to conquer the galaxy right now. Why should we wait? Who cares about the stupid Selden plan when we have death rays? Treves and Pellerat find Gaia, and while they approach, Pellerat starts to speculate as to whether or not there might be aliens upon it, to explain why it might be regarded as it is by their stellar neighbors and the mule. They discover otherwise when they encounter a space station which sends over a figure, a woman named Bliss. Bliss has a huge ass, which I mention because it must be an essential plot point, as Asimov keeps bringing it up, as in enough times that Sir Mix-a-Lot would say, yeah, we get the point, Isaac. Bliss brings them to the world of Gaia, which we learn is in fact a superorganism composed of all the life and non-life of the world with a common consciousness. Pellerat finds it all fascinating, and not just because he'd like to rock on her back porch all night, while Treves finds the idea disturbing. Gaia tells him, though, that he's here to make a choice, and that it can only be him that does so. While that's going on, Gendabal and Mayor Brano have met in space, the latter having a partially effective mental shield in place. Not perfect, but enough to stop him from just reaching in and doing whatever he likes with his mental powers. But it turns out that Novi is secretly an agent, working for Gaia, and at the critical moment gives the two of them and the others on Treves' ship a chance to share thoughts directly, because Treves has to make a choice, one almost as frustrating as the end of Mass Effect 3. Treves can side with Brano and the First Foundation. If she does, she will destroy Gaia and the Second Foundation and establish a military empire for the galaxy. It will be full of resentful and rebellious citizens and require constant reconquering, not to mention shifting power away from civil to military authority. But, she argues, it's the triumph of free will. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but it's their choice to make rather than one that's being dictated for them. Treves can side with Gendabal on the Second Foundation. If he does, he will thwart the efforts of the other two, and Gendabal will expand the influence of the Second Foundation to move towards the planned Second Galactic Empire in another 5 centuries, and afterwards to be guided by them. It's a path of stagnation, Treves is told, but Gendabal argues that it's a galaxy that would offer peace and stability rather than death, war, and chaos. Or Treves can side with Gaia. If he does, the other two will go back home thinking that they won a major victory for their side at Seychelles, and Gaia would work towards expansion so that eventually it would encompass the entire galaxy. Gaia argues that by choosing Galaxia, Treves would be choosing life. It's a hard choice, but Pellerat makes a comment that the model of the galaxy seemed to move like a living thing, and Treves chooses Gaia. But after the fact, he's annoyed because he knows Pellerat was manipulated into mentioning that, and admits that a large reason that he made that choice was because it was the only one that he could make that could be reversed. But he would like to know just why Gaia is hiding Earth. Gaia, though, has no idea what the hell he's talking about. It had nothing to do with that. If that information is missing, it's someone besides them. Thus, with that teasing little plot thread, we conclude Foundation's Edge. There's several tweaks to the mythology with this outing. Trantor, for instance, is moved out of the core and placed as near as possible and still safely habitable. There's a significant change to the backstory of the mule. And also, at this point, is mention of the events that start to tie the eras together, as discussed last time. Mention is even made to the end of eternity, although the story told differs from the events of that, but that is freely acknowledged and may have been intended to show that the story has descended into myth. The effort at unification alongside the moving of Trantor is typically Asimov. He's perfectly willing to allow contradiction in the work, unsurprising since they weren't originally intended to be united. But if there's a contradiction with science, that has to be addressed. The chance to see the second foundation in greater detail was a wonderful addition to the story, explaining a bit more of what it is, how it came to be, and its politics. Of course, there's an important point to that. Asimov no doubt wanted to portray it as just as flawed as the political government of Terminus. Asimov name drops eternity, no doubt, to remind us of the conclusion of that story, that stability can lead to stagnation, that even though it seems the most desirable, it can easily rob us of what we need to triumph. The book even goes so far as to refer to Gendabal during his days of training as Cub Gendabal, Cub being a term used under similar circumstances for the Eternals. I also felt the choice laid before Trevize was reminiscent of the one laid before Harlan when he had to choose whether or not to allow eternity to exist. We also see the politics involved amongst the Second Foundation, and not even based upon ideology, but upon ambition, the same thing that motivates Mayor Brano, who doesn't want to just be a footnote in galactic history, but to be forever remembered just like the giants of Foundation history. This seems like Asimov stacking the deck, though. Brano, the career politician, is now going for a military expansion when politics is her arena, and politics are doing so effective a job of expanding the Foundation without the slightest threatening gesture. And Gendabal's sudden decision that the Second Foundation needs to work technologically to match the first was born from the confrontation that Gaia admits it maneuvered him into. And while the flaws of the two foundations are placed under a microscope, Gaia's flaws are given a pass in this novel. Especially considering a point related to my least favorite part of the book, the retcon that the mule, in fact, was actually from Gaia. It struck me as simply cheap, like something another author would put in if they had stepped into the story. But since Gaia and Galaxia are such a huge topic that Asimov spends this novel and the next one exploring it, I'm going to hold off discussing that for now. Trevize concludes that Bliss is in fact a robot made to appear human, and Bliss speaks in such a way that she seems to suggest that she is, but she won't commit to it outright. Asimov addresses this in the next novel, but not definitively, although given some of the events, it seems highly unlikely that she is. It feels like Asimov had more planned to do with that, but then decided it just wasn't interesting and sort of tied that plot point off as quickly as possible and left it. Said it didn't matter and all of that. Still, the introduction of robots into the Foundation era is an interesting idea. That they were involved in the development of the galactic civilization subtly, and can perhaps help explain their absence in the Empire and Foundation eras, but I'll also put that off since I think it's even more relevant in the next book. Because of its nature as a novel rather than a collection of stories, Foundation's Edge definitely has a different structure to it, and Asimov spends a lot of time basically shooting the breeze with himself as he discusses things that, on the whole, probably don't matter. Just kind of talking aloud about ideas with only the most tangential elements to the story, like the rings inside the ship that are pointless with reliable gravity and no acceleration forces. Still, it's quite a solid novel, and while it's a bit disappointing that he seems to have abandoned the idea of transition to explore this new concept of Gaia, it's still an enjoyable addition to the series. In our next part, Foundation and Earth, we begin the search for the world and the explanation for who's responsible for its disappearance.